Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Aspergers Studios. Are you trying to thrive in today's society being someone who's autistic? Are you trying to find your true self? Well, my next guest, the actually autistic life coach, Christopher Fern, I'm going to talk with him and we're going to find out what he does and how he can help you find your true self. So sit back, relax, and grab your favorite beverage, and I'll see you on the other side. See you there.
I wanna believe in the truth, but only see what I'm shown. Got the freedom to choose, but can't decide on my own. Follow what the group is thinking, bottle up my intuition till it's popping out.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Aspergers Studios. Today on the show, I'm joined with the actually autistic coach, Christopher Fern. Welcome to the show, Christopher.
Hello, Reid. Good to be here. Thank you very much.
No problem. As I always like to ask every one of my guests, so tell me a little bit about yourself.
That's a statement, but I will tell you a little bit about myself. I am 36. I have most of my life, I knew that I was a completely different way. I had a completely different way of operating, but I was often experiencing what I think a lot of us experience, which is this sort of alienation from society and this like I was made fun of in school. I was in detention every week. I failed a lot of the early classes until I got to calculus of all things. I had this really weird, like all of my friends are like, dude, you're just so weird. And I didn't know what they meant. I was diagnosed with Asperger's as well, actually, just a few years ago. And it wasn't a huge, like a lot of people have a lot of mixed experiences. You talk to one person, like, it changed my life. You talk to somebody else, like, it didn't matter much. The only thing it did was give me a box in which to say, there is this thing that we call this, that I am now called. And now I can say everybody else that's also called this thing has these shared comorbidities or these shared characteristics, aspects, or traits that I also recognize. So while I didn't feel like an alien, not all of my problems were solved. My early childhood, there was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of neglect. And there's a lot of systemic issues that have created it that I'm going to not get into here. But essentially, I had a lot of trauma, right? And a big part of the trauma is and was having to do with the stigma around Asperger's and around autism, and people didn't know what it was at the time. That was 20 years ago or earlier. And one of the biggest things that I focused on as I was growing up, as I was becoming an adult, is what is the absolute best way to ensure that I can thrive, not just survive. So, for example, my mother, I also didn't have a lot of money. And my mother was on disability for most of my childhood and teenage years. And I would watch her plan out her next month with the same amount of money every single time. And then at the end of the month, be stressed that there wasn't any. So it's like you have the plan. Why don't you just follow it? It should just work, right? It should just make sense. And I'm using these terms specifically because these are also terms that I found that one of the collective experiences, and you may have had some similar experiences, is this sense of you should just be able, better. You should just be able to make it work. If so-and-so can do it, why can't you? And why don't you just make a list? Because this word just shows up a lot. And I was committed, even as a child, watching the suffering of my mom. And mostly I was suffering too, like I saw her get stressed. I saw her have significant mental health issues. And I saw a pattern. And I said, I can do it better. And when I got into my early 20s, got salary jobs, I realized, you know what? I actually can't do it better. I thought I could as an egoic little young adult, but I can't. And I figured out, I still was committed to figuring it out. And I eventually, I think, cracked the code on what it is about people. I won't even say it's neurodivergent people, but people that causes this disconnect between what we should be able to do and what we actually can do. And that's ever since I realized that code or that algorithm. I'm a computer
Mhm.
science guy. I'm a very logical person. I'm a very big analyst. I realized that that's what the world needed. And so that's what I'm here on the planet to do, is ensure that people can make better decisions by using some unconventional and counterintuitive methods that I've created, but that work with the human being, not with the idealist version of themselves.
Now, do you have ADHD as well?
I have not been diagnosed, but I say that I do. And I say that I do because, very similar to how these boxes work, I talk to several others with ADHD and I look at the diagnosis criteria and I fit the bill. So I expect that I would be. Now, here's the interesting part about that question. In my young adult life, or young adult life, and young teenage life, and even I think young childhood, I was really hyper. I was talking really fast. I was
Mhm.
bouncing off the walls, right? And I learned very quickly that people get mad when you do that.
Yep.
So if you look at me as an adult, I don't act like some of the ADHD children I know. But when I pay attention to my inner monologue and what's going on in my head and what I am compelled to do, it's very ADHD in character.
I get that. I get that a lot. I mean, I remember being in school and stories of my parents saying to me, we used to get calls from your teacher saying we couldn't sit still in class until one day they found out, oh, he can sit still in class, but it was only one class and it was his general science class. And they were like,
Yeah.
oh, something's different about him. Why is it just his general science? And then we didn't know till later, until my mid-20s, when I had a family member who was a family lawyer, and I had family members who were psychologists and psychiatrists, all told my mother, we think Reid's got symptoms of high functioning autism. And then it's like, ding, like this light bulb went off.
Did it go off or turn on?
Probably turn on because they didn't know what was going on with me.
Yeah. So how did that? I'm curious. I know it's your show. I'm just curious.
No,
How
it's
did that?
okay. That's what
How
my
did
show's
that?
about. You can ask me anything as well.
Cool. How did that affect you though? Because I know for me, I was put in the class. I was assessed in all kinds of different ways. There were some suspicions. Nobody ever really said, Chris has got this. So you say ding almost as if everything changed for you. And I don't know much about you, so I'm curious.
No, it didn't change for me, but it changed my parents' perspective of,
Hmm.
oh, this explains why he's done this. Explains why he's done that. This explains why he doesn't think before he says something. I mean, there have been stories of me saying something to my parents or correcting my parents when they're telling a story when I should be thinking, maybe I should stop and wait for them and get them alone, then tell them so I don't embarrass them.
Yeah. Relevance is one of the themes in my work that I find is not just something that neurodivergents have a hard time with, but neurotypicals too. I think we just have a lot harder of a time.
Yeah. I mean, I've been told I I was sent to a special education program in the University of Oshkosh right out of high school
Really.
after I graduated, and I didn't last long. College life back then wasn't for me. And I shared this story in my last show. I remember being sit down. We had a dinner with the previous students that graduated, and one of the students sat down with me, and we're talking. He's like, "I'm going to teach you a secret." And he's like, "I'm like, sure. What's that?" He's like, "Where it takes a normal person 1 hour to do their work, it takes us 2 to 3, because it takes us 1 hour just to read it, and then that 2 to 3 hours is to process it and understand what we just read."
Yep.
And that sticks
Yep.
with me to this day. Is our minds don't work A to B. Our minds work A to B to C to G, back all over the place until we hit B.
And then we have to figure out what's relevant out of all of that, which requires contextualization, which also requires often a break in order to switch gears. I'm a big numbers guy. And I don't think about myself as a numbers guy, but I find a lot of meaning in numbers because numbers don't lie, right?
Sure.
The only thing that might make them biased is the context in which they're created. And so I've measured, I'm not going to say objectively because that would contradict the statement I just made, but I've measured things that I do and say how long it takes me to do an assignment or a project. Or even before we got on the show, we were talking about, some of the stuff that I was focusing on today. And if somebody were to watch my process, they would say, wow, you're taking so long with something that would just take me a few minutes. But one thing that I find to be a constant thread with every neurodivergent that I talk to is it's not even about a lack of discernment. It's about the inspiration to explore and apply ourselves in ways that are systematic and cause us to ultimately save time, but it doesn't look like it at first. Like, have you ever seen the chart where they show like a programmer doing a job and then a normal person doing a job? And the normal person is just a diagonal line. It goes up linearly, right? Just like this.
Yeah.
The programmer, so it's a chart between how long the job takes and how much effort you're putting in. The programmer just goes like almost vertical, and then it's just a horizontal line. So looking at that from the outside, it looks, and programmers, a lot of them are neurodivergent people, and I'm one of them. But it's a consistent way of thinking, of saying, I'm going to build this system, and I'm going to build the system to apply to the future version and iteration of the system so that it's easier to implement. And I'm also going to build the system in such a way that it applies to more than just this one context. And in doing that, it takes so much longer, but the ultimate byproduct is you never have to deal with it again. So I think, and now we're finding all of these very famous people that have made a huge impact in the world are autistic or Aspergian. And it's a really interesting thing to see happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, was I, oh God, I lost spot already. But
Famous people,
famous
coding
I
chart.
know what you're talking about with famous people. I mean, more and more famous people are coming out today. I mean, a lot of people don't even know that Daryl Hannah is autistic.
I don't know
Chris
who he
Rock
is.
has come out and spoke about it.
Yep.
And I've talked with people who doubt Elon is autistic. He says he is, but come on.
I don't know. I think if you have the right tools, you can function at a really high level.
No real person would do what he would do if he was autistic. I mean,
How do you mean?
he put all his money into Twitter. He should have taken that money and thrown it into research for autism if he was autistic.
Unless he sees something that we don't see.
True.
I have theories. I'm not sure where your politics stand on this show, but what I will say is one of the things I've run into in my own experience in trying to both educate and help autistic people is a marketing and sales problem. And you talked before the show about a theme that you bring up in a lot of episodes, and I can weave that in here quite nicely.
All right.
This theme of why it seems like other autistics or other people will chastise the words that we choose to use, like Asperger's. And it's a complex question, so I'm going to try to touch on several points of this while also looping in your Elon comment, because I think you just tapped into a really important vein of the problem for autistic people. And I'm wrapping Asperger's into autism in this, and I hope that doesn't offend anybody watching or listening, but it's just a habit that I have, and I'm not offended. If you want to separate, I'll do that. But the thing that I have experienced, I create free resources. One of them is a guide, a set of videos that teach people about the neurology and psychology of the autistic and ADHD mind. And it's research backed. It's got, I'm talking, but it's got transcripts, and sure, it's not a fully crazily produced video because I will redo it before it's even out the door if I spend that much effort on it. I had to script it out, write out the script in Chat GPT, reference all my articles to even make it consumable. Now, sales and marketing, the way that it's taught is classically very spammy, but you also have to capture people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
Our group of people, ADHD/autism, experiences a reality that I don't know if I can get into on this call. I don't know if I can distill it down to be very short. I can try, but we experience a reality. But the byproduct of that reality is we need frequent reminders. We need to keep things in our sphere around us. We need to constantly be discerning what's relevant and important. And we also need to not feel guilt or shame about it.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's my experience with myself and others. So now here's a guy, me, who is trying to get this resource out to the world. You know, one of my objectives is to affect 2 million families in the next 4 years. And the only way to do that is to work with people like you or other advocates who are reaching people and not only give out these free resources, but provide practical solutions. And this isn't a pitch for the other stuff that I do, like the tools that I built or the coaching. But what it is a declaration that, yeah, I have a business. I am a coach. So if I send out a free resource that answers the problems of Jane and her question about her son that she can't understand, or about this overwhelmed woman who's completely unable to pay her bills, and I can see the patterns and the reason why and how she's prioritizing what's around her and how that causes, like, she has the money, but this same issue, like, that's my mom, you know? Or I can see people who want to understand themselves, but are so bogged down by life and just barely getting by. And so bringing all of this together, marketing and sales says follow up. I go to follow up with people. I send out this resource. If we just take the subset of people who say, yeah, I want this free thing, and then I send it to them, only about 20%, maybe 20, usually 10 to 15 will open the resource. Then I have to go remind them again. And then I get another 10 to 15. And then I remind them a third time and I might get about 5. So that's only 25% of people will do the thing that they said they were going to do. Out of that 25%, half of them say that they want a follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these are actual numbers that I've measured in my marketing. Half of them say that they want to follow. Can you remind me in 2 weeks? So I remind them, and they see the message and they don't reply, or they say that they're overwhelmed. So I come back a week later and I remind them, and I'm as friendly as I can possibly be. And I'm also aware that I need a ton of reminders, and that our sort of people need a ton of reminders. But there's a clear bifurcation that happens very easy. And I'm on Facebook mostly. So there's a clear separation that happens. After about 3 or 4 reminders, about 10% of people will just block me. So there's a lack of ability to even get myself out there. About 30% of the groups that I put my content in have kicked me out because they think I'm a scammer or a sales and marketing guy. I have a business. I've reached out to group owners and they say, if you're trying to promote your stuff, don't. I'm like, but how are we supposed to help the autistic community if I can't even get a word in edgewise?
I get that too. A lot of the Facebook groups don't want you to promote, and it's the same question. Why don't you want us to promote? How are we supposed to help you? We're here to help the mass.
Right.
And you're not allowing it, then you are a horrible group owner.
Exactly. Well, or what I've found is they don't have any clear idea of what the heck they want to do with the world. They just know there's a problem and I need to bring people together. And I think that's the solution. But when I ask these group owners, when I say to them, look, they say, what specifically do you want to do in the group? I'm like, honestly, this thing I'm trying to just post is just to enlighten the people who are confused. My mission in the world is huge. What I want to do is eliminate conflict. I think I have a way to do that. Do you want to talk about it? Is there a paid service involved? Like, wow, really? Everybody's suffering and you don't want to talk about it, and you're going to block me, or you're going to say, I don't think this conversation's for me. Meanwhile, you're going to acknowledge the systemic issue. So going back to your Elon comment, if I had a bunch of money, the first thing that I would want to do is buy some way to reach a lot of people without that effect. And there's another side effect that he's dealing with now, which is a bunch of scammers and bots. But how can we have autism? We have autism research. How can we have it matter if nobody is willing to hear it?
Yeah, I hear you on that. And to go back to what we were talking about, now I remember what I was going to say. You said you're a programmer. What's funny is I don't understand programming logic.
Okay.
My father was a computer person, but me, I don't understand. I can't write code if my life depended on it. I don't understand the logic, and that's my big issue is logic.
What's interesting about logic for me, as I said, you might have caught it, I didn't do well in mathematics, which is an incredibly logical thing. I failed geometry. I didn't do well in mathematics until I hit calculus. Because what calculus deals with is the condensation and expansion of patterns. It's not solved for X. That didn't make any sense for me. Like, I could do it, but like, I didn't have fun. But once I got to calculus, I was like, oh, that's why math exists. Because I don't think in terms of programming. Programming is an expression of the thought. So this idea of being able to, you were saying it before, we go to A to P to Q to and eventually come to B. And you were nodding as I was describing this sense of we're trying to take in all this information and then find what's relevant and reorganize it and recontextualize it. To me, that's the thing that I want to express through the products that I create. And you have to make it be something. So programming was eventually where I ended up. But the art of coding, a lot of people think it's logic. Most of software engineering or coding is about how you connect and relate the ideas together. And then you're a programmer, essentially. Like, you can be a programmer without writing code. You have to just simply understand how things connect. And I haven't met a neurodivergent person who doesn't have a sense of that.
Anyway.
So I would challenge you on that.
Okay. Anyways, what prompted you to start your coaching business?
I alluded to it earlier. I grew up in a very disenfranchised situation. I saw and watched, started with my mother suffer while thinking she had it all together, while also telling me I should have it all together. I tried and failed to have it all together. I thought a lot of common things were the solution. They weren't. For example, I thought having more money and a salary, I thought having a salary job would solve my problem with not having enough money. So I got one. I applied myself really hard. I got a salary. I loved the fact that I got paid regularly and I didn't have to work hours and punch a time clock. But then I encountered a different problem. I had a rich week when rent was due, when rent wasn't due, and a poor week when rent was due. And during those times, I experienced the same problem my mother did. I thought I could do it. I planned ahead. And when I got to the end of the plan at the end of the month, it never matched up. So then I had to start looking at myself and what actions I was taking, and then ask myself why I was taking these actions. For example, on the poor weeks, I would overspend. I would deviate from the plan, and it would be harder for me not to. One of my classic things that I would do is buy a bunch of chicken wings or pizza and just like more than I needed, like 6 pounds of wings, right? Like a lot. And of course, yeah, there's emotional work and trauma work that some might say would cause that, and that's valid. And I had to discover that for myself, but then I also had to say, well, why is it that even though when I have the abundance of money or time or energy, I notice how it should be, but then when I don't have that abundance, it's almost like what I noticed doesn't even exist, no matter how many times I go through that process. And that unlocked a lot of realization for me. And then that's when I started to apply these relationships between things, and specifically relationships between my perspectives over time. Now, these were things, again, I didn't know I was autistic at the time. I'm just literally trying to function in the way that everybody else says they should. Later, I find out because of my research and because of talking to people that nobody knows what the hell they're doing. But I had to figure out how to create a situation where I could have discernment through the emotions and experiences that I was blind to during a time when I had a low functioning state. And so it wasn't until I realized that I have these low functioning states once a week or more, and that's way more than most other people, and that when they happen, it ripples for days, and I'm like always in recovery mode, that I really had to up the ante and figure out, okay, now, so if that's true and that's a constant, how can I use what I've learned about how I work to counter that experience? And in doing that, I eventually reached a point, and I've reached it several times in my life at this point. I reached a point where I didn't have the rich weeks and poor weeks anymore, where I was able to use my math and reasoning knowledge and algorithmic thought way of thinking to set myself up so that just like your health insurance would be or your taxes would be, I got paid and a chunk of money would come out of that paycheck and some stuff would happen to it. And I would have money, but what I wouldn't have is the fear or anxiety that I couldn't spend it. And it would be the same amount every time because I was paid salary. Well, that sounds simple enough, but if people who are watching and listening, or even maybe you, don't have that experience where every time you get paid, it's like, oh, this is free money, I can do whatever I want. This is going to be a hard thing to grab onto, but there's such an abundant state of mind that comes with that, such a freedom. It's the freedom that we all want by trying to plan and by trying to organize and by making our checklists. And I had that for about a year. Then I lost my job and was faced with the next challenge of, now what do you do when you can't even trust that salary income to balance all this out, when everything's variable? How do you replicate that situation? And that sent me down another algorithmic journey. Ultimately, the reason I got into coaching is to replicate that feeling that I felt, and to do it in a way that is, well, as easy as possible to replicate. And from that, I built tools for myself and replicated it again in a constantly changing environment, and realized, oh, I think I'm onto something here. Because if I can create this for myself several times over in any state, and I feel this feeling of there's no conflict, there's no fear, I have access to whatever I want. Now, of course, there's some realities that we have to face. So it's this bridge between that feeling and pragmatism, which launched me down that was the third iteration. But now it's at a state where if the principles that I teach are applied in the right way, inner conflict disappears, even when everything else is changing. And people can find a way to trust themselves, even when they don't have full access to all of their mental faculties, just because of, I'm not going to tell you the secret sauce here on the podcast. So because of 2 decades, essentially, of these fluctuations and explorations into mathematics and algorithms. And so coaching for me is a channel to deliver that. It's a way to change people's lives directly. And it wasn't, looking back, I don't think it's ironic that I got my diagnosis and then I got into coaching. But I always knew, like, for at least a decade, at least after the first iteration, I was like, people need this. Because what I got from my mother, who I had the same problem, she knew I was having money issues. She knew I was replicating her situation. When I got into that state and was using it for a while, she resented me because, because I would make a statement like, do you need money for something? Like, whatever. She had something happen. I'm like, do you need cash? We can work something out. And it came across like the guy with all the money. And I remember she said this comment. She was like, yeah, not everybody just has money tucked away like you do. And part of my process is to, it's not about money, right? We can replicate this with time or energy. I was able to apply these algorithms to time management and energy management and money management, of course. But at the time it was money. And I saw the truth in where she was coming from, because that's the same truth that I resented myself against during my poor weeks. I was like, oh, F me. I can't do anything right. Like, what's with these rich people that all have all the money, you know, all the time, and then I would get paid and act like the rich person and overspend. So it was just this really interesting dichotomy to see from somebody who knew what should be the case, but also had the exact, it was almost a predictable response. And I see it to this day. It's the same response why I get blocked on Facebook and everything else. So there's a huge gap for people between them being where they are and feeling as though where they want to go is even achievable. And you see this all the time with neurodivergence. Suicide rates are higher, mental health issues are higher, the overall self-confidence is in the drain most of the time. And the reason for that is because of what I call social indoctrination trauma. It's a trauma that we all experience, but the short version of it is that we should be able to do all these things that we generally aren't wired very well to do. And much like a computer, like you and I are talking over the internet right now, I have no idea where in the world you're even located. You're seeing my video, you're hearing my audio. There's all this encoding and decoding happening and transmission over just two lines, two like on-off switches. So computers operate with very similar algorithms to what I've created. And when you learn these algorithms, they're incredibly counterintuitive. One of the most effective sorting algorithms looks like chaos when you follow it as it happens. Oh, I'm not surprised that things like June bugging are a thing, right? It looks like chaos. So the way for us to get over social indoctrination trauma and the way for us to make better decisions and end conflict is to, I would go use my systems, but no, like, is to embrace these counterintuitive approaches and realize that if we resent them or if we have any negative charge or emotion toward them, it comes down to not having had the tools for so long that you think yourself incapable, which is what she was experiencing. 3 years later, I was able to have her remodel her kitchen in cash, by the way. But that was her turning point.
All right.
That's why I got into coaching. I think that
Okay.
answers your question. Do you think it did? I kind of went off the deep end there.
All right. Do you have any hyper focuses?
I try not to, and there's a very specific reason. I have compulsions to hyperfocus, but I try not to, because after every time I get into a hyperfocus session, and I'll define that as an hour and a half or more of just a deep dive into something, I'm burnt out. I have no more energy for the day. And one of the methods that I use to ensure that I'm not burnt out is to take frequent breaks. And one of the things that I know about frequent breaks is when I take a break, even if it's to use the bathroom, I have answers to stuff that I would be sitting there for a half an hour trying to crank out and figure out. And all my brain needed to do is relax a little. And that's the same pattern, right? It's this rich week and poor week pattern. It's, you know, poor people will get more payday loans than anybody else, and they'll pay high interest rates because of the lack of foresight. It's the same thing. To me, I have a lot that I want to dive into and hyper focus into, but I also recognize the immense value in buying my time back by stopping.
That kind of reminds me of when I was in college. I had no idea how to study because my bachelor's degree was online and they did everything on a point-based system. So I reached out to my friends and they told me the best way to study is 10 minutes on, 5 minutes off. And lo and behold, one day I'm walking down this pathway and I'm going over material in my head and I'm like, oh my God, I understand what the hell I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And I find this a lot. That is the point where a lot of the neurodivergent folks that I serve, and like, I think this is in general, right? There's a resistance to stopping because the hyper focus is a sense of dopamine. You feel really good. Like I was telling you before the call, today was one day where I hyper focused for hours and I had to do yoga and exercise and all breath work and all kinds of stuff before our call to get back, right? But I haven't done that in months. And there's a dopamine craving that you're looking for. Well, why would you be craving that much dopamine? It goes back to social indoctrination trauma.
What is a typical day like for you?
oh, I could, okay. I wake up at 4 a.m., 3 to 4 a.m. I go to bed between 8 and 9. I wake up at 3 to 4 a.m. It takes me about 45 minutes to just get going. What that consists of is sitting at the edge of my bed and procrastinating for a few minutes. I have my phone on block. It blocks everything. I can't message anybody. I can't do anything. So I just sit there, generally hating my life. Honestly, it's very difficult to wake up. Not just because of the hour, but my body is stiff. I'm in pain. I don't want to do anything. All these things. And I remember that I've custom formulated if you haven't heard of nootropics, they're cognitive enhancers. They are really helpful for a lot of things. And I custom formulated a stack that I have raw powders on the desk behind me. So I remind myself, hey, if you do A, B, C, X, Y, Z, your sense of being and all of this is going to dissipate and you're going to be in a different state. So you're procrastinating to avoid the state you're in, just get up and do it. And eventually, if I don't get up and do it, I have to use the bathroom. So I have to get up and do it anyway. So I start that, use the bathroom. I'll do some yoga. I'll take my nootropic supplements. I do body, mind, and spirit practices before anything, unless I'm really inspired, unless I'm like, oh, this thing's on my mind, I want to address it. I'll do yoga. I'll do breath work. I'll do stretching, each of those at least a half an hour. Not that I have a timer running, but what I'm looking for is openness and space in my mind, space that is not, I hate my life, space that reconnects me to a desire to want to help people, which is there. It's just buried under the pain of sleeping. My bed's not comfortable, all kinds of problems. So I do that. And then I get into things that are serving the people who have already paid me. So that might mean going into Slack and connecting with all my clients. That might mean following up on calls from the previous day. I like to do that at night, but sometimes it doesn't happen. That might mean just reviewing the calls that are coming up. Like I sent you that message, about the call that was coming up. So starting to just enter into the day, do those kind of things. My days are pretty regular. They're reaching out to clients, connecting with them. They're doing all my business stuff. So that might mean responding to posts on Facebook, responding to comments, responding to direct messages, managing my CRM, putting out content. I usually have 2 to 3 calls a day. So that's about a couple of hours there. And in between time, I'm going over my finances and managing that. There's a whole lot of cleanup I'm doing from some other errors that were made. I might throw in some exercise if I have the time. I used to take 2 to 3 hours a day to exercise, and I regret not doing it now. But it's managing my time. And the way I manage, like I could go down an itemized list, but ultimately the way that I manage it is I use Pomodoro. So often it'll be when I start to make my supplements or right afterwards, I'll hit the timer and just start following it. And sometimes I might need to pause and go a little late, and that's fine too. And then I'm following the list that I made myself the night before. So I think I'm going to just shortcut this by saying the end of everything, the most important part of my day is the night before, because in that night before time, I'm reviewing all the conversations that I've had during the day. I'm processing, I'm just planting seeds in my mind. I'm finding the important questions I want to answer. I'm finding something to be excited about the next day to remind myself when I'm sitting on the edge of the bed, because I know I will. I am building out my Pomodoro blocks for the next day as well. And they don't always go in the order that I prescribe myself. But what they do is they give me a list of things to choose from. They give me a context from which to pull. And I have my project management system up, which has everything categorized by most important for the business. And then I have a personal section. And then I have my Pomodoro stuff up. And I just run stuff that way. It's worth noting that the way I choose all these things is that every week I look at what I did the previous week. So I'll look at what an average day over the past week has looked like, how much time I'm contributing to personal versus administrative stuff versus revenue generating stuff, serving clients, things like that. I look at what can be delegated. So that sets up things that I might delegate if I can, if I, as I build out the VA team, or, if I have the training set up or whatever. It's just reviewing the week sets me up for the next week. And then each day I'm following that plan. And then I'll look at a month. You know, like I'm doing a monthly review over these next few days, which means I have a stack of sticky notes that are maybe an inch high right now, where I'm triaging, hey, is this stuff that I want to be doing? Is it new things to consider? Does it fall in line with the current plan? So everything I'm doing is intentional, based on some context that I've created to build out a plan. And if it's not intentional, it becomes a liability. It becomes unplanned time, unintentional time, which sucks for a lot of the people that care for me or want to, you know, surprise me with something or do something that I didn't expect. And at the same time, for me, and I think for a lot of us neurodivergents, having that surprise deviation comes with a huge risk of forgetting why other stuff is important, forgetting how, you know, the context that you create for yourself, as well as forgetting to even come back to it, or hyper focusing, or being burnt out. So it creates this nervous system instability. So if somebody wants something from me, I say, hey, give me 25 minutes. That's just my standard thing, because that's the length of a Pomodoro block. Give me 25 minutes and I'll get back to you. Or, you know, I don't answer my texts unless I'm in a Pomodoro block. Or if they want to plan something consistent, I'm like, let's make that intentional. Otherwise, what's the point? Like, I'm a very mission-driven person. Some people aren't, but for people who are mission-driven, it's like, what's the point of doing something unintentionally? You know?
Yeah. What advice do you have for those who are getting diagnosed late?
Getting diagnosed late, huh? Understand your reason for wanting a diagnosis. Some people think that the diagnosis will make things available to them that will make their life easier. In my experience, the diagnosis may do that, but it also makes your life harder in some ways. And they about balance each other out. So if you're not looking for a diagnosis for confirmation or for a very specific purpose, I would invite you, who is getting diagnosed late, I would invite you to be clear on what your intention is in getting one.
All right. Now let's go back to you for a minute.
Yep.
Do you have any sensory issues?
Yes, quite a few.
All
You
right.
want me to tell you about them?
You can if you want. It's up to you.
I'm happy to. No. Lighting, sound, and I think texture too, but I have just not been as connected with my body, so it's hard to know. I can tell you for sure lights. Like when I do these calls, these are fluorescent lights just because of how the camera works best. If I have fluorescent lights on for more than an hour and a half, I get drowsy, I get tired, I feel burnt out. I can turn on for just a second here. I've got a halogen light. Now, most people are like, halogen sucks, but that's a halogen light that just turned on. And that's what I usually use during the day. That light turns on, it wakes me up in the morning. I have lights like that all around for two reasons. They're warm, and the color temperature isn't so, it's not cold. It's not that burning your eyes out thing. I also have blue blockers that I wear, just blue lights. The blue lights really affect me. And I've done a deep dive into the neurology and nervous system stuff too. So I think they affect a lot of people, but people just assume it's okay to be tired like this when there's something they could do. Sound is huge for me. I used to have a music studio. The mic I'm talking to you on now is okay, but I used to record. I used to play guitar. I don't anymore just because my life has changed a bit, but I used to have a room that I made. I lined it with 15 moving blankets or more. It's a high number, a lot, and pitch black and totally dark. I could go in that room, and I didn't realize that I was as sensitive to noise as I was, and I probably even now, since I haven't had that room in a while, don't fully feel it, but I know it. I went into that room, and within 5 minutes fell asleep. I woke up 20 minutes later thinking I got a full night's sleep in 20 minutes because of how rested I was. That was a room I was making as a vocal booth. And I also am very able to hear, like if I'm setting up my equipment, I can hear the difference between a speaker pointed at me or just like a couple degrees off. I can set up an environment by just moving speakers or or microphones a couple of inches and it sounds totally different. So I'm big on sound. It brings me a sense of peace. It brings me a sense of, there's something about having good audio. It's a lot like having a working computer. You know, I like to say I was an IT guy before I was a programmer, and I like to say that technology is one of those things that you don't notice until it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Sound is one of those things that that you don't notice how bad it is until, well, you have to have some experience if it's sounding really good. But once you have that experience, you don't notice good sound. You notice bad sound. And I've had to get very connected with what causes my neck to get tight, what causes my body to get tight. It's light and sound. Dog barking, people like in this room that I'm in, it's an office in a basement. So when people are walking, I know where everybody is in the house. And I can't shut that off.
No. Would you say you have hypersensitivities to like sound and light and smell? Because I know with me, all of a sudden I've noticed I'm able to hear certain sounds really affect me more than other people. I can hear my mom's cell phone in a noisy place. Smells especially, I'm very hypersensitive to. Like if I'm surrounded by in areas where people are smoking or anything, the smells just make me nauseous.
Interesting. I don't know if I'm so I know that I'm hypersensitive to sound because when I point out or adjust sound in the way that I described, people think I'm crazy. I don't experience that judgment about smells. What I do notice about smells is that it's similar to taste. Like I take a shot of apple cider vinegar every morning. If I don't do that for a few days, yeah, exactly. If I don't do that for a few days, that's the look on my face is, oh, this is disgusting. But if I do it every day, it's almost something I crave. My mother was a smoker most of her life. When she was smoking and I was living at home, I couldn't smell when she was smoking. I can smell a smoker outside the house away from the basement. So I think when it comes to those things, some things you have a sort of adapted sensitivity to because of the lack of stimulation. I don't think that I have I'm not the kind of person who can't smell. Actually, I think I actually, bad perfumes or bad candles or fake odors, like I don't like them. They don't give me a headache or anything, but they actually could take away from my focus quite a bit. I know some people who they get headaches, they get migraines. I'm not one of those.
All right. What do you struggle with on a day-to-day?
Giving a shit. That's the biggest one. And I think a big part of the reason what that looks like for me is like I described to you in the morning. And if that focus is broken, it doesn't take long. It takes maybe 20 minutes for me to just feel powerless and feel like I'm unable to anything. And then it's a downward spiral into hell. So all of my practices are designed for me to remember that I care. And I guess it's not just giving shit. I guess it's also underneath that is nervous system management. I'm at a point in my life right now where I am an 8 out of 10 most days, just for reasons. And it's not because of my schedule, but my schedule certainly is not very forgiving. If I screw something up, I end up having a ripple effect for days, and there's not much tolerance in my life to that right now. So if I were to make a more general statement that I think we all can relate to, it's the fear of consequences that we can't see, the fear of consequences that I can't see. When something changes or deviates, or when there's something new, I have a lot of trepidation, or I have apathy and just do it anyway. One of those areas, you mentioned sensitivities, one of those areas is food. I've gone through several instances. Sorry about that. I've gone through several instances in my life recently where I fasted for extended periods. And when I do that, all of my cravings for sugars and candies and sweets and fried foods and even meat go away. And I crave things like kefir and like fresh strawberries. I can taste the difference between strawberries that have been frozen versus, just recently, I get very sensitive to taste. And so when we talk about a difficulty, and when I say it's this sense of remembering the value of what I know to be true, like that I'm here to help people and all these things, with and nervous system sensitivity, the cost of not remembering that is, and one of the reasons I've had so many instances of fasting, is that when I reach a certain point of overload, which it's way before I lose my temper or yell or anything else, I'll just start eating like cupcakes and cookies and shove stuff. Like I just don't care, It's
It's your comfort.
it's my comfort, but it's also directly related to the nervous system regulation, right? So what do I struggle with on a day-to-day? I would say nervous system regulation, because if I don't wake up in physical pain, I don't have to get pain out of my body. It's a clearer channel, clearing my body, clearing my ability to be able to. I don't know that there's been something that we in the community have labeled that, but I do think there's a central cause.
All right. Do you have problems with social cues, reading people's facial expressions?
I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because one of those things I've had to deep dive into is my difficulty understanding people a me problem, or am I just super susceptible and sensitive to it? And one of the conclusions I've come to back to the boxes of labels that we were talking about. Every word is a symbol for a bigger idea. So what I would say is I have trouble reading social cues of people who I have fundamentally different sets of fundamentally different hierarchies of how I value and construct language. Some may know that as the double empathy problem, but it's not always neurotypicals that I have trouble understanding. And in fact, even in the double empathy problem, there was never anybody that had 100% comprehension. So I have trouble a lot of the time with people specifically who have a different way of putting together or taking apart similar concepts. And what I've boiled that down to in all this algorithmic math stuff and what I teach is a simplified version of that. In fact, one of the 15 aspects that make up discernment is the emotional state. And if people that I can tell, because this is my work, like if I'm talking to somebody and they have a different value system, if I'm sharing some information and they really don't value it, or vice versa, but they're entertaining it, as neurotypical people will do all the time, or they're being casual or nice, I find that it ultimately boils down to a difference in how one values either what they think is behind the idea that I'm saying or the concept that I'm saying based on their projection, or they don't value my perspective. Either way, it's then when the social cue stuff breaks down, because for me, I just want you to be honest and tell me I don't give it, I don't care. I don't care what you're saying. I'm cool to hear that. A lot of people are not.
All right. Now let's get to the question at hand, and that is, do you feel that people should have the right to tell us what we should label ourselves, either autistic, Asperger's, ADHD?
Nope. And the reason for that is exactly what I just said. The reason for that is because fundamentally words are a symbol. I don't think anybody has the right to impose anything on anybody. I think that if one imposes something on another, it demonstrates either one of two things. One, you don't value the other. Or two, you have a complete and fundamental misunderstanding of what you think the other values. Because I have seen people say, you should use this word because don't you want to stand up for or represent XYZ idea? But what they fail to see in that particular frame is, yes, I do want to represent that idea, but I also have other, that's not a complete picture. That opinion of me not wanting to represent, say, the Asperger label is not a complete picture. If that's a true thing for me. Ultimately, I incorporate philosophy and Socratic thinking into a lot of my work. So the answer to your question is fundamentally no, because the underlying principle of the thing, the underlying principle of that question comes with an imposition. In order for people to say, yes, I get to tell you what to label yourself, you're also agreeing that there is an authority outside of you that you have to defer the meaning of who you are to. And that authority gets to declare it for you. And let's say that you don't agree with, Nazi Germany, or you don't agree with some of the other background related issues, or maybe even some of the science, but you agree with other science, and you see a representation of the science that you agree with as being one word, and somebody sees the exact same set of symbols, the exact same set of concepts as being another word. Again, words are symbols. So for us to argue semantics based on a converged idea, i.e. a word or even a picture or what something is a fool's errand, in my opinion, to the point where, I don't know if you've seen this guy, but there's a very articulate Native American advocate who's been in the media a lot lately, not like, CNBC or ABC, but he's showing up on everybody's feeds. And he describes how language, most of the Lakota tribe doesn't have clear nouns. If they do, it's only a specific instance in a specific time in a specific way of working with something. For example, this isn't just water that I'm drinking. It would either be the water that I'm drinking in this moment, in this interview, at this time, or it would be like the flow of life. And that's more of a concept, right? Just to edify my point a bit and things outside of myself.
And finally, where can people find out more about you and your practice?
Cool. So if you want to learn more about me, you can go to, if you want to connect with me directly, especially ChristopherFern.com/group. It will bring you to my Facebook group, where I'm on top of all of the comments and all of the responses. I speak a lot about the philosophies and principles I've described here in that group. If you're interested in learning the psychology and neurology of neurodivergence, as I mentioned at the beginning of this call, go to mindfulwaytraining.com.
And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Reid Miles, and that was Christopher Fern. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you. Take care.